Welcome to Reel Autopsy, a division of StoryForge Academy. Here, we don't review films, we dissect them. We cut through their surface and study the bones beneath. Because only when we see what's dead inside can we learn how to make stories live. Tonight's patient is a film that mistook rot for depth, a film that believed decay was the same as complexity. Its name is Destroyer, and our diagnosis begins now. Ina, the corpse on the table. Let's start with the obvious. The film looks like tragedy, it sounds like tragedy, it even smells like tragedy. But it's not. It's an imitation of grief, a mannequin dressed in pain. What we see on the screen isn't a living character. It's a corpse pretending to bleed. Nicole Kidman walks through the film with the face of someone who has forgotten what being alive feels like. That's fine, if the film had given her a reason. But Destroyer confuses exhaustion with realism. It confuses silence with intelligence. It shows us the ruin but hides the fracture. We see the wound but never how the knife got there. Cinematic tragedy is not about showing misery. It's about constructing the mechanism that leads to it. Every great tragedy is an equation of cause and consequence. This film instead is all consequence, no cause. It bleeds without a heart. At StoryForge, we teach that a character's pain must be earned through design. The audience should feel the geometry of suffering, the gears turning beneath emotion. But Destroyer offers none of that. It simply declares, she's broken, and then forces us to watch her crawl through 2 hours of narrative dust. T, the failure of form. Let's peel back the first layer of skin. Structure. A film lives and dies by the rhythm of revelation. When we know what, when we learn why, and when we feel how. In Destroyer, these rhythms are chaos. The flashbacks arrive like stray bullets hitting at random. They don't illuminate the present. They interrupt it. The director believes confusion equals depth. But confusion is not depth. It's absence. It's a hole disguised as mystery. Here's the fatal assumption. They thought a fragmented timeline would create intrigue. But fragmentation without architecture only breeds apathy. When you don't know why something matters, you stop caring whether it does. A non-linear story works only when each fracture of time sharpens the picture. In Destroyer, every cut to the past just blurs it further. We don't get revelation. We get repetition. Each flashback tells us the same thing. She's miserable. We got that the first time. This is where the screenplay dies. Right on the operating table of structure. The heart no longer beats because it was never built. 3. The hollow heart. Aaron Bell. Now we reach the core, the supposed soul of the film. Aaron Bell, the undercover cop eaten alive by guilt. At least that's what the poster says. But guilt requires choice, and this woman never makes one. She regrets everything but decides nothing. She drifts. She reacts. She's not a character. She's debris, and debris has no arc. You can't build empathy around motionless pain. The writers want us to believe that Aaron's silence is depth. But depth isn't silence. It's conflict. It's the space between two equal and opposite desires. Aaron has only one, self-destruction, and even that feels rehearsed. When you write a broken character, you don't show the break. You show the struggle to hide it. That's where drama lives. But Destroyer drags her wound into the spotlight and keeps the light there until it burns out. In short, the script confuses pathology with personality. It doesn't write a human being. It writes a symptom, a V, the myth of depth. Why does Hollywood love these empty tragedies? Because despair photographs well. Gray tones, broken faces, minimal dialogue, instant prestige. The industry mistakes gloom for gravitas, and Destroyer is the perfect specimen of that disease. The film thinks it's an X-ray of guilt. In truth, it's just a fashion shoot for trauma. Nothing inside moves. Nothing changes. Even time feels embalmed. And yet critics applauded it for being bold and gritty, as if suffering itself were an achievement. But suffering, without the logic that produces it, is emotional vanity. It's a performance of pain, not a revelation of it. When we at StoryForge dissect films like this, we don't ask, What went wrong? We ask what never lived. Because some films don't die. They're stillborn. Destroyer is one of them. The lesson of failure. Now, why do we study corpses? Because every dead film hides a lesson for the living. Failure teaches anatomy. So let's look at the bones. The film lacks mechanical tension. That's the first missing vertebra. In an undercover story, every second should tick with danger. Every lie should have a timer. But in Destroyer, the mission feels like a rumor, not a reality. We never sense the machinery of risk. Second, it lacks moral geometry, the angles of guilt and justification. A true tragic figure stands at a crossroads. Two right choices that destroy each other. Erin has none. She's just wandering through aftermath. That's not drama. That's depression. Finally, it lacks causality, the bloodstream of story. Actions cause reactions. Choices create consequences. Remove that, and you have what we see here, emotional entropy. The reconstruction, the living version. Now, for the sake of education, we turn to the autopsy's second phase, reconstruction. We rebuild the film not to praise it, but to demonstrate how it could have lived. Stefan Afshar, one of our academic leads at StoryForge, designed a case study, a hypothetical version of Destroyer that actually functions as drama. What you're about to hear isn't fanfiction. It's anatomy done right. Two undercover agents, a man and a woman, sent to infiltrate a criminal network. Their cover, lovers. Their real mission? Dismantle the gang from the inside. At first, it's a performance. They flirt for the job. They kiss for the mission. But slowly, the act grows roots. Pretend affection becomes genuine dependence. And that's where the trap begins. 7. The reconstruction, continued. They fall in love. Not the cinematic kind, but the slow, dangerous intimacy born from shared danger. The kind of bond that exposes you. They start finishing each other's lies. And that, in an undercover world, is fatal. Now picture the scene. A smoky bar late at night. The gang celebrates a heist. Laughter, music, and a moment of false safety. The female agent leans closer to her partner, forgets the eyes around her, and says the wrong word. Just one. Agent. The air freezes. Nobody breathes. The gang leader looks up, a man named Silas. He doesn't react immediately. He just watches her. And in that silence, he already knows. From that instant, the mission is over. Everything that follows is slow-motion death. That single human slip, that heartbeat of truth, is worth more than 2 hours of contrived flashbacks. That's tragedy built on logic, not sentiment. It's the kind of beat every real writer understands. A mistake that can't be undone. Silas doesn't confront them. He tests them. He tells everyone to lay their weapons on the table. The room falls quiet, except for the sound of metal. One by one, guns slide across the wood. The agents hesitate, a second too long. Silas smiles. It's enough. That's what Stefan Afshar calls visible tension. Pressure built from behavior, not dialogue. The audience knows before anyone speaks. The lie is bleeding out. Then comes the twist of cruelty and intelligence. Silas is no brute. He's a strategist. This is how you write moral architecture, not endless tears and regret. One impossible choice. 2 lives, one must end. That's how guilt becomes structural. Afshar's reconstruction is ruthless. The agent's love becomes their noose. Duty becomes torture. Every second drips with the weight of the inevitable. And when the climax arrives, it doesn't scream. It whispers. He doesn't kill them. He studies them. He finds their weakness. And he builds his revenge like a craftsman. He has one message delivered to the female agent's phone. A video of her daughter tied silent in an unknown room. The message is simple. Wait, the judgment scene. Silas gathers them in a warehouse. Dim light. Concrete floor, 4 people present. He asks everyone to put their weapons down again. He knows the truth now. This is theater. The two agents stand side by side, pretending calm. The silence stretches until the sound of a gun cocking slices it open. Silas looks at them and says softly, he turns to his own son, a member of the gang, and whispers something we can't hear. The son trembles. Then we see the daughter's face again on a nearby screen. The timer beside her counts down. Silas gives the agent her choice. She can save the child by killing the man she loves, or save her love by letting the child die. She freezes. The man, her partner, looks at her, nods once. He understands. He forgives her. That's when tragedy breathes, when comprehension replaces anger. But before she can act, Silas moves the gun to his own temple. I'm not as cowardly as you, he says. You could have done what I did. He pulls the trigger. No noise but the body hitting concrete. That's not revenge. That's indictment. It's the criminal teaching morality to the law. It's irony carved into bone. The aftermath. Silas's men let her go, out of pity or respect. No one knows. The daughter is found alive. But Erin Bell, in this version, is finished. Not because she failed the mission, but because she succeeded without courage. That's the final cut. The revelation that breaks both heart and logic. She carries guilt, not as memory, but as sentence. This is the film Destroyer wanted to be, a study of guilt that arises from structure, not posturing. A tragedy that breathes because its choices are visible. That's the difference between cinema that pretends to feel and cinema that makes us feel. Back to the corpse. Now that we've seen what a living film looks like, let's return to the original body. Because only in contrast can we measure decay. Destroyer never gives us visible tension. It never gives us moral pressure. It hides everything behind fog. Even its supposed emotion is concealed behind monotone acting and color-graded misery. Here's the truth. The filmmakers weren't building a story. They were protecting themselves from one. They feared clarity, because clarity would expose how thin the writing really was. At StoryForge, we call this the cult of ambiguity, a belief that if you confuse the audience, they'll mistake it for complexity. It's the same disease that infects half of modern cinema. Destroyer just wears it more proudly than most. The irony is cruel. A film named Destroyer ends up destroying only itself, not through daring, but through cowardice, through its refusal to design. Every great story, no matter how dark, is built on architecture. Even chaos needs scaffolding. But this film stands on air. It confuses formlessness with freedom and ends up weightless. The audience doesn't feel tragedy. They feel time passing. SAS, the academic dissection. In class, when we teach this case, we don't show it as an example of bad cinema. We show it as the perfect autopsy subject, because it demonstrates, organ by organ, how a film dies from intellectual vanity. First, the heart stops when emotion is faked. Then the brain, when logic is ignored. Then the skeleton, when structure collapses. Finally, the skin, when style tries to hold the shape of something that's already gone. Students always ask, could it have been saved? The answer, yes, and with discipline. With understanding that pain is not story. Design is story. Cause and consequence. Choice and cost. That's the bloodstream of cinema. Without it, you're not making a film. You're filming a funeral. Twain, the cult of pain. Let's talk about the lie that keeps films like Destroyer alive. It's the idea that pain equals art. That if a story hurts enough, it must be profound. It's the cheapest myth in modern cinema, and the easiest to sell. Pain without purpose is emotional pornography. It's despair packaged as sophistication. Real art doesn't worship pain. It dissects it. It asks where it comes from, what it costs, and why it lingers. But Destroyer is addicted to the image of agony. It uses it as makeup, not meaning. We see dirt on skin, but never the blood beneath. We see hollow eyes, but not what they've seen. It's misery as fashion. You can almost hear the pitch meeting. A gritty female anti-hero, a tone of regret. muted colors, minimal dialogue. That's not storytelling. That's marketing. Aesthetics are not empathy. Suffering is not structure. And Destroyer, for all its effort to look profound, never once earns a heartbeat of truth. Okay. 3. The mirror test. At StoryForge, we use something called the mirror test. It's simple. If you remove every word of dialogue, and the film still communicates the story through choice and behavior, then you've written a real screenplay. If it collapses into confusion, you've written a diary. Destroyer fails the mirror test instantly. Strip away the muttering and exposition, and nothing remains but mood. Mood isn't story. Mood without motive is just smoke. In Stefan Afshar's reconstruction, the same test produces the opposite result. Even in silence, the choices are visible. We see love become weakness. We see guilt grow teeth. We see the moral geometry that tragedy demands. That's not magic. It's craft. The difference between pretending to feel and making the audience feel. Fartpi, what the industry refuses to learn. Why do studios keep rewarding films like Destroyer? Because mediocrity disguised as misery flatters their ego. It makes them feel intelligent for enduring boredom. The awards circuit loves to mistake austerity for authenticity. A gray filter, a tortured monologue, and they whisper, Oscar. But no amount of grayscale can hide structural laziness. Hollywood has forgotten that emotion is an effect, not an ingredient. You don't pour grief onto a page. You build the machine that creates it. And when that machine runs, the audience feels. When it doesn't, they stare. We stare at Destroyer for 2 hours, and the only emotion it provokes is fatigue. Kfi, the professor's lesson. Stefan Afshar ends his lectures with a warning. He says, "Never fall in love with misery. Misery is seductive because it's easy. You can hide behind it and call yourself serious. But the craft is in structure, not suffering." That's the philosophy that built StoryForge Academy. We don't teach people how to cry on paper. We teach them how to construct emotion, how to engineer catharsis, because storytelling isn't therapy. It's architecture. It's physics of feeling. Every moral decision, every cause and effect, every fracture of conscience. These are the beams and bolts that hold narrative weight. Without them, the film collapses under its own self-importance. Destroyer is a perfect collapse, and therefore a perfect lesson. 16. The true cause of death. So here it is, the final diagnosis. The cause of death, intellectual vanity. The filmmakers believed that atmosphere was substance, that confusion was depth, that performance could replace construction. They were wrong. What they built was a mausoleum, beautiful but empty, a shrine to despair, where story should have been. When you watch Destroyer, you're not witnessing tragedy. You're watching a post-mortem on ambition without discipline, a script that wanted to feel profound, but never had the courage to think. 17. Why we cut. People often ask us why we dissect films instead of celebrating them. The answer is simple. You can't learn from perfection. You learn from failure, from the bodies left on the table. Every incision reveals a truth. Every dead film teaches anatomy. And Destroyer teaches one lesson better than most. That emotion without structure is self-pity. And self-pity kills storytelling faster than ignorance ever could. We don't cut to mock. We cut to understand. To remind writers that what lives in the dark must have a skeleton. Otherwise, it's just shadow. 68. Closing the body. The autopsy is complete. The patient is beyond saving, but the knowledge remains. In the quiet that follows, we can almost hear the echo of what cinema used to be. Moral architecture, human logic, emotional precision. That's what we rebuild here, piece by piece, film by film. Because in the end, the art of storytelling isn't about empathy alone. It's about engineering emotion with truth and giving chaos a spine. Destroyer gave us none, so we give it meaning through its failure. We turn its decay into data, its silence into instruction. That's the alchemy of StoryForge. We burn what's false to find what's real. Nay, the final words. The scalpel is clean. The table is empty. The lesson is clear. Pain is not art. Suffering is not story. Confusion is not complexity. And tragedy without choice is just noise. Cause of death, self-importance. Time of death. The moment it mistook emotion for design. This was Reel Autopsy, StoryForge Academy, where cinema comes to die and stories learn to live.